Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World, the Eurozone. Let's take a look at some of the headlines coming out of the European continent this hour. The UK Labour government says it will end automatic benefits for asylum seekers as part of a push to cut irregular migration. The Interior Ministry says the overhaul will follow Denmark's strict immigration model. Russia says its forces have seized 2 more villages in the Zaporozhye region. This comes as Moscow continues slow advances against outnumbered Ukrainian troops as it pushes to capture further territory in the Donetsk region. President Zelensky says Ukraine is working to resume prisoner exchanges with Russia, seeking the return of around 1,200 Ukrainians. Security Chief Rustem Uramov says talks have been held in Turkey and the UAE with support from allies. Ukraine says it will import gas from Greece this winter, with President Zelensky announcing a new supply route to offset Russian strikes on energy. He says Kyiv is also working to secure nearly €2 billion to stabilise its power sector. Storm Claudia has killed 3 people and injured dozens in Portugal, with days of extreme weather also hitting Spain. The system has now pushed into Britain, where floods in Wales and England have triggered evacuations. Finland's President Alexander Stubb says a ceasefire in Ukraine is unlikely before spring and urges Europe to maintain support despite Kyiv's corruption scandal. He warns Europe must sisu as Russia steps up hybrid attacks, and he says he's going to use his ties with President Trump to back Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron will host Volodymyr Zelensky in Paris tomorrow, seeking to finalise a historic security agreement. The leaders will discuss energy, defence and economic support as Russia steps up attacks and Europe watches Kyiv's corruption scandal. Thousands in North Macedonia have protested ahead of the trial over a March nightclub fire that killed 63 people. Families of the victims, dressed in black and holding photos, demanded justice for the tragedy in Kokani. We start this hour in the United Kingdom, and Britain has said that it would launch the largest overhaul of policy on asylum seekers, drawing inspiration from Denmark's approach, which is one of the toughest in Europe. The Labour government has been hardening its immigration policies, particularly on illegal small boat crossings from France. This comes as the government seeks to stem the surging popularity of the populist Reform UK party, which has driven the immigration agenda and forced Labour to adopt a tougher line. As part of the changes, the statutory duty to provide support to certain asylum seekers, including housing and weekly allowances, will be revoked. The government has stated the measures would apply to asylum seekers who can work but choose not to, and to those who break the law. It said that taxpayer-funded support would be prioritised for those contributing to the economy and local communities. Let's in fact listen in to what British Interior Minister Shabana Mahmood has said about the changes to the asylum policy.
What the new reforms will do is change that generations-old assumption that sanctuary provided to refugees can very quickly lead to permanent settlement and all of the rights that go alongside that. We will be changing that to a more temporary process, and the situation will be assessed every 2.5 years. So if your country becomes safe in that intervening period and you are remaining on this essentially core protection model, you will be returned to your country, because we see countries that have started off in conflict and people have moved in order to escape that conflict becoming safe. So I think that is right. And but the whole of the proposals that I will set out tomorrow will also provide new routes for people to be able to work in this country. And if you are working and contributing, you will be able to earn an earlier settlement in this country. And the totality of that package will promote fairness and contribution.
Joining us now is Keith Vaz. He's a former UK minister and he joins us live from London. Keith, thank you very much for joining us. Of course, immigration remains a key, if not the key issue in the United Kingdom. right now. We obviously see Nigel Farage's Reform UK party surging in the polls. Do you think Keir Starmer's Labour government is doing enough with these visible optics when it comes to doing action on asylum seekers?
Good morning, Thomas. Well, these are only proposals, and of course, other governments in exactly the same position have made big announcements about immigration. The biggest flagship policy of the last Conservative government was sending people to Rwanda to be processed before they got to the United Kingdom. That took years to get into effect and to implement. I'm afraid what Shabana Mahmood is doing, and I have great respect for her, I've known her for many, many years, over 20 years, is that she is providing, as you have correctly said, Thomas, the optics. Let's show a perception that the Labour government is going to be tough. However, the last time they did this, which is one in, one out, we discovered that the person they were sending back to France ended up coming back into the UK. The problem with the asylum system is not policy, it's the people who implement it. And for 9 years, I was chairman of the Home Affairs Select Committee that scrutinised the Home Office. We insisted that they came before us every 3 months with a report on how they were doing. The biggest problem you have with new policy is the organisation that is charged to ensure that something is done about immigration excesses is actually not fit for purpose. This has been the case for the last 20 years. That's why the best way to deal with this issue is to actually split the Home Office in half so that the policing and law and order programme that they have to monitor and fund is done by a separate minister, and immigration becomes a separate department of government so that the Secretary of State sitting in the cabinet is able to control what is going on. Because I don't think these proposals will be enough to be as tough as Denmark. Denmark is a completely different country. It doesn't have the kind of diaspora that we have. And of course, if you're looking at reviewing this every 2.5 years, people have families within that period. What if one of these people, and it'll be more than one, decides to start a family in this country? How will they then be sent back to a country that is no longer broken? And who will make the assessment that it's no longer broken? Is Syria, for example, a country where we've accepted a lot of refugees from,
Yes.
is that now not broken still? Is it not the case that there are parts of other countries in the world that still are suffering from these issues? So we have a real problem here. It's good to make this announcement. Of course, it's good to send out the mood music, but I don't think it's going to get to the people who are making billions out of sending illegal migrants across the Channel to the United Kingdom. These are the people who will continue to take money from vulnerable people, put them in boats and send them into the UK. So the real question will be, in 6 months, a year's time, has it had any effect? These are big, big questions that remain completely unanswered by this government, because of course they've just really started to grapple with this issue. But as you said, this has been done because of the rise of Reform. Reform have a much tougher policy, which is don't let people in the first place. As soon as you arrive in Dover, Thomas, and you claim asylum, your case begins, and it could last years and years before the Home Office considers it. So, when I finished being chairman of the committee, there was a backlog of 450,000 cases. 450,000 cases. If you appeal, there is a backlog in the courts. So wherever you go, people are going to be allowed to stay until they exercise their rights. What they have to do, of course, which Reform will press them to do, is change the adherence to the European Court of Human Rights. That's going to make the biggest difference. They're not doing that.
And Keith, what do you say about Labour's methodology of attacking the issue of immigration overall? Of course, we've seen some rather Trumpian social media posts even from Keir Starmer when it comes to posting sort of threatening messages on his Instagram about these illegal migrants that are coming over. How do you think that's going down with the British people, given the current trust of Keir Starmer's government?
it's so disappointing that we are seeing senior ministers saying these kinds of things, because are we not supposed to be a country that celebrates diversity? Were we not the first country that had an Indian origin prime minister? I've just completed my book, let's give it a plug, Thomas, which is brought out every 5 years about Black and Asian representation in Parliament. We've got more Black and Asian people in Parliament than we've ever had. Certainly when I was elected, I was the only person of Indian origin. Now we have 60 or 70 in the House of Commons and even more in the House of Lords. So where is this all going to lead, this kind of rhetoric? It reminds me of what Theresa May did, which is she sent round buses around Wembley, which, those of you not familiar with the UK, has a large migrant population, and basically told people to go home. To say, why are you going to settle here? You better go home. And this is the kind of rhetoric that is going to be very divisive in the Labour Party, which has always been a party that has brought these different strands together. What you have to be is you have to be tough on illegal migration. You've got to do the deal with France. The reason why you've got all these boats coming over is because we're not in the EU. As soon as Brexit happened, the French turned a blind eye to the boats leaving France. Now, if we had all these boats going into France, then the French would jolly well soon jump up and start screaming, because they are, of course, a nuclear power. They're one of the most powerful countries in the world. But because they're leaving and it's no longer a French problem, that's why you have this issue. We have to get very close to the French, I'm afraid. We have to be very nice to them, and we have to do the deal, rather like Berlusconi did with Colonel Gaddafi, which stopped the flow of illegal migrants from Libya to Italy. You have to show source countries that you're better off staying in your own country than leaving. If there is a war on, they don't have that choice. They will want to go to the first country. First country for them is Greece. It's not the UK. If you are in Syria and you're facing, problems there, you don't travel all the way over to the UK. And that's what's happened because we left the EU. No one's saying this, Thomas. Brexit has been a disaster for our immigration policy.
Keith, do stay with us as we have further updates from the UK. However, we move over to economic policy next, and Chancellor Rachel Reeves has made a dramatic U-turn on her plans to raise income tax in this month's budget after weeks of deliberations. Initially, she had indicated a possible tax hike given the UK's fiscal challenges and warned of difficult choices ahead. However, after receiving updated economic forecasts showing a £21 billion shortfall, Reeves and Prime Minister Keir Starmer decided against the rise, citing political concerns following turmoil within Labour. Despite the OBR's projections, some government insiders suggest that the U-turn was driven by the desire to avoid further political damage, including alienating voters and worsening political discord. This reversal comes amid a backdrop of potential leadership crisis within the Labour Party after Keir Starmer faced criticism over his leadership and the handling of government advisers. Keith joins us once again. Keith, the BBC have called this a hokey-cokey when it comes to Rachel Reeves' decisions here. Your thoughts about the UK's reception to Chancellor Rachel Reeves changing her mind on this tax hike?
I can tell you what my reaction is. If she's not going to put up my taxes, I'm very pleased about that, as you would be, Thomas, if you were living here and you had to pay higher taxes. But why start this whole ball rolling in the first place? This is the problem for this government. They get people to assume the worst, and then they change their mind halfway through. I was in Parliament for 32 and a half years. Every Chancellor of the Exchequer has always said the words, there are tough choices to be made, there isn't enough money, we need to be very careful. And then they go and overspend on things that they don't need to overspend on. For example, we're spending a lot of money on defence for a country that has not been attacked for 60 years. We're spending a lot of money on overseas support for other countries like Ukraine. We're not spending the money on what the people of Britain wanted to be spent on, which is the infrastructure of this country. Putting up taxes or not putting up taxes doesn't really matter in the budget because they will find another way. Either VAT will go up. This is only about income tax, of course. VAT will go up. They'll find another way. I've just heard today that congestion charge in London is going to go up by 20%. Even if you've got an electric car, I bought an electric car a few years ago in the hope that I'd be exempt from congestion charge. That is what we were promised. Now the tax is going to go up. Yeah. So it's not going to help the overall ratings of this government. They need a fundamental change in the direction. They need to establish what the Labour Party is in government for. Nobody quite knows what that is. And eventually, of course, they might work this up. But at the moment, nobody does. That's why the Greens, what used to be a fringe party, has now got more support than the Labour Party. Yes. And Reform, which used to be a fringe party, has got more support than the Conservatives. Mm. The last final point, I've just come back via Dubai, and there's a lot of British people of Indian origin who've moved to Dubai because there's going to be an exit tax if you decide to leave the country in order not to pay tax on your worldwide earnings. A lot of the non-DOMs, these are people who live here but have income abroad, are leaving. That's going to have another effect on the British economy. So who do you take the tax from in the end?
Yes.
If it's the hard-pressed middle class, people who work for a living, not people who are on benefits who don't pay tax, that is what Keir Starmer needs to address. He ceased to be the champion of Middle England, and he needs to re-find his radar very fast.
Yes, Keith Vaz, always a great pleasure having you here on NewsX World. Thank you very much for taking the time and joining us. We now move on over to the east of the continent, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has vowed to overhaul state-owned energy companies after a $100 million corruption scandal. The scandal has engulfed the energy sector, hitting a country already reeling from Russian attacks on power facilities. Zelensky has ordered full audits and management changes, including a new supervisory board for the state nuclear company Etrogom within the next week. Reforms are also planned for oil and gas giant Neftogaz, the gas transmission system and hydropower company Ukrohydrogen. Several top officials linked to Zelensky are implicated, including ministers and a former business partner. 2 ministers have resigned, and this scandal has raised fresh questions about Zelensky's commitment to fighting corruption. Joining us now is Julia Kazdabina. She is a senior fellow at the Ukrainian Prism, joining us live from the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. Thank you very much, Julia, for joining us here on NewsX World. Is Volodymyr Zelensky doing enough to tackle corruption? And how are the Ukrainian people feeling about this? Of course, Ukraine has a desire to join the European Union, of which these corruption scandals appearing is a challenging sign to that. What more can you tell us?
Well, of course, the revelation has been devastating because the recent Russian attacks have led to people spending 12 hours a day without electricity. And when you're hearing on these recordings that these people who are supposed to actually ensure that you have electricity, you hear them discussing that it's not worthwhile spending money on defenses to make sure that Russia cannot the Russian hits are not efficient when they target Ukrainian electricity infrastructure. And you hear them discussing that it's not worth spending the money on it. And at the same time, you see that they're building these like luxurious homes for themselves. This is devastating. But on the other hand, it's also giving hope, because we understand that the energy sector in Ukraine has been corrupt. I mean, media and anti-corruption activists have spoken and written about it for many, many years. And many people have made their fortunes off the corruption in the Ukrainian energy sector. And so the fact that this has been documented by Ukrainian anti-corruption agencies, and that it has become public and that it has created such big scandal in the midst of the war, when the Ukrainian government is so much dependent on Western support. It gives hope that finally this is going to be resolved, and it looks like President Zelensky is making the right steps. First and foremost, the two ministers, the former energy minister, who is now the justice minister, and the current energy minister, they're like more than 100% confidence that they're going to be dismissed by the Verkhovna Rada, by the parliament. And Zelensky is cleaning the system of their appointees, because all those recordings, they indicate very clearly that many corrupt individuals were appointed to key positions in the Ukrainian energy system. And also, hopefully, it's going to lead to the situation where there will be new rules established in this sphere. So it's going to be more transparent, and this transparency is going to enable Ukraine to move closer to the European Union, which is the goal. And civil society is watching President Zelensky very closely. Of course, there are different trends. There are those who try to exploit the situation and call for Zelensky's resignation, which would lead to chaos. And these people are egged on by former Ukrainian officials who fled to Russia, and who are now trying to promote Russian narratives, and they call for people to come to protests. And there was an attempt to gather a protest yesterday in downtown Kiev, and that was not successful. Very few people came. And those who are politically active and who understand how serious the situation is, they are working on coming up with specific decisions that can be made to resolve the situation, understanding that Zelensky cannot be reelected right now, and understanding that he must make the decisions if the country is to survive. And so, of course, it's probably not easy for him, and many believe that what he's doing is not sufficient, but we'll see. I mean, he seems to be warming up to the right decisions, because initially the first reaction was very sort of reserved, and there were accusations that this was some sort of a manipulation, and but now he seems to be moving into the right direction.
And Julia, of course, many critics from the West and beyond who debate whether the Western powers should be sending money to Ukraine. They often cite what they call entrenched corruption within the Ukrainian government. Does this signal that Zelensky is doing enough, or are those cries, do you believe, still going to echo around those conversations?
Well, the cries will definitely echo. I mean, there are enough of those who are opposed to helping Ukraine, and enough of those who are Russian influence agents who are there to specifically make sure that Ukraine's position is weakened. So those cries will definitely echo, but we will see. What happens. I mean, so far, President Zelensky is making decisions, and we'll see who's going to replace those appointees, the current appointees. So whether or not those are going to be people with a clean reputation. Also, we will see whether there will be some decisions related to the Ukrainian law enforcement, because in Ukraine we have this big sort of fight between the new anti-corruption and agencies and the old law enforcement agencies, which traditionally have been sort of a arm of the Ukrainian government to go after political opponents. And so, I mean, but this is the time, I mean, probably the best time when decisions can be made, and so we will see how Zelensky does. So far, it's difficult to say before all of the decisions take effect and before we see what has changed. It's not enough. Not enough has happened to evaluate the effects of what it does.
Yes, Julia Kazdabina, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. Pleasure to have you on, and we will, of course, bring you all the updates when it comes out of Ukraine as soon as we get them. Now we move on, and the President of Finland, Alexander Stubb, has said that a ceasefire in Ukraine is unlikely before the spring, and European allies need to keep up support despite the corruption scandal which has engulfed the country. Stubbs added that Europe will require sisu, a Finnish word meaning endurance, resilience and grit, to get through the winter months as Russia continues its hybrid attacks. This comes after the Ukrainian military has reported striking an oil refinery in Russia's Saratov region, while the Russian Defense Ministry has stated that their forces have captured Rivnofila and Malatomachaka in the eastern of the country. Now we move on. And thousands of people have protested in Skopje in North Macedonia on November the 15th, demanding justice for the 63 victims of a deadly nightclub fire. The blaze occurred in March at the Pulse nightclub in Kokani, a small town around 50 miles from the capital, during a hip-hop concert. Supporters of the victims, many dressed in black and holding photographs, marched in a demonstration called the Angels March. Authorities have charged 37 individuals in connection with the fire. The tragedy, which also left dozens injured, is believed to have been caused by sparks from flares. Protesters, including family members of the victims, are calling for accountability as the first trial hearing is set to begin on November the 19th. Well, that's all we have time for on today's Eurozone. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.